So I've spoken before about a dear friend of mine named Carolyn Jean Jones. Carolyn is a middle-aged African-American woman who was sex trafficked when she was but a little girl. And for 35 plus years after that, she walked the streets of Van Buren, a very well-worn path for adult prostitutes, at least 35 years. Now, Carolyn did not finish high school. She was drug and alcohol addicted very early on, simply to numb the pain of her life. She has been stabbed. She has been shot. She has been beaten many times. She has been imprisoned, and she has been jailed more times than she can count. To top it off, her sister was murdered, as were many of her friends, right there on Van Buren, walking the streets. So I don't presume to tell her story like she tells it, because she tells it, it breaks your heart to hear what happens to people. But I do want to tell you about a turning event in her life when she was lying in a hospital bed and she was that close to death. She'd been beaten and I think stabbed on that occasion. She was very close to death. She's lying there in bed and she cries out, "God, I need your help. If you can just get me through this night, I promise that I will work for your good for the rest of my life. I give me to you, to your care." Faith shows up in interesting and unanticipated, unexpected places and in unexpected people. Carolyn has been in recovery, has been free from drugs and alcohol for 8 years plus. After that night, yes, there were many scars for Carolyn. The worst ones, of course, were those scars that cannot be seen, the scars inside her head and inside her body. But she says to me on a regular basis, I could never get through each day without my faith in God. Carolyn has been a mentor at Streetlight USA, the place that recovers girls under the age of 18 from trafficking. She mentors them, and I have to tell you, every time I go there, there are like 50 plus girls at Streetlight, going from age 11 up to 17. But they all want Carolyn to be their mentor. She is amazing, absolutely astonishing. She's been there, done that. She knows the ropes. And she so loves the girls. As importantly, Carolyn is an advocate at the state capitol, and was probably mostly responsible for laws being passed last year that protected our most vulnerable. She went to both houses, spoke in front of a multitude of highfalutin people, and I don't think there was a dry eye in either house. And these bills were passed unanimously, largely because of Carolyn and her telling her story and telling it from her heart. Now, Carolyn's story is nothing like mine or your story at all. I suspect that if Carolyn walked into Ascension this morning, all of us would experience her as so not like us. Not only in the way she looks, but the way she talks. We would probably experience her exactly as the wrong kind of people that Jesus hung around with. In the midst of this otherness, Carolyn testifies to God's hope and God's healing every single day by her faith as she mentors girls and as she advocates and becomes the voice for the voiceless. Carolyn has taught me over these last 7 or 8 years, has taught me so much about faith. I am deeply touched with gratitude for Carolyn to be in my life and for Carolyn to call me friend. Now Jesus, of course, he hung out with all those people. He hung out with the grungy, right? He ate with them, he healed them, he hung out with the disenfranchised, with the people on the border of society, the outsiders. He hung with the Carolyns of 2,000 years ago and the Carolyns of 2016. He hung with those, and he also was surrounded by the powerful, the enemies of Israel. They were all over and around Jesus. And even once in a while, he dared to praise one of these powerful people, like he did in our gospel lesson today, when the centurion was seeking healing for his, I prefer to call servant, it's translated as slave, it's a servant, his very beloved servant. He really liked the servant. So he was looking for healing, and for some reason he seemed to think that Jesus, this Galilean peasant, could do the impossible, could heal sickness and stave off the powers of death. Now it's interesting, in our story, Jesus never meets the centurion nor the slave, eyeball to eyeball. No, their communication were through intermediaries that were sent. And the first intermediaries were the local Jewish leaders who came to him and asked him to go to the centurion's house. Dr. Luke tells us that Jesus just started to be on his way to the house without a thought. Now that seems like something Jesus would probably do, right? Except when you really look at this gospel lesson and you realize that he's going to a centurion's house, the enemy of Israel's house. The centurion is the one that promoted that violence and oppression, that Roman ickiness that was all around at that day. Going to a centurion's house, healing his slave, was not something that we need to just take for granted. This was shocking in many ways. And yet, Jesus, he starts trekking through to the centurion's house. Only, I guess, when he got very close to the house, he was met by another group of friends of this guy who says, no, don't come. Really, I am not, as the centurion, I am not worthy to host you in my house. Jesus, just speak the word and let my servant be healed. Just with that sentence, Jesus is absolutely astonished and amazed at this man's faith. He'd never seen anything like it in all of Israel, and that's saying a lot. And the next sentence in our gospel lesson, Dr. Luke tells us that when all these people returned to the centurion's house, they found the slave in good health. So I'm guessing Jesus must have spoken the word. This is a shocking story. Jesus is shocking. Jesus is mostly shocking. It's not shocking that he healed anybody, clearly, but it was shocking that he healed the servant of the enemy of Israel, and he spoke with such faith. The faith of this enemy was the shocking part of this story. Now, lest we miss the point of the shock of what it must have been like to hear this story, I think we can probably imagine what it must be like, what it would be like if Jesus walked into Ascension this morning and said, "People of Ascension, you know those people in that building over there? They don't believe what you believe. They don't look like what you look like. They don't believe any of that, but they have more faith than all of you." Or what if he came in and said, "People, that drug addict, alcoholic, prostitute over there, than all of you put together." It is a shocking story, but it is shocking in that sense, but it really tells us in a deeper way that God will not be constrained, will not be confined by the borders that we personally draw around each other. That there are no outsiders at God's table. There are only human beings in need of healing. So we can learn something from this enemy combatant, enemy soldier, who is offered up to us as a model of faith. The promise of the fullness of life and salvation comes right very close everywhere that Jesus walks. Even in unexpected places and through unexpected people. When Jesus walks closely. Unexpected people, the ones that we don't like, the ones that we call our enemies, the foreigners, the strangers, people that don't look like us, don't pray like us, maybe don't even pray at all. And as I contemplated this gospel story, I found it, one, very difficult, but two, the Spirit kept lifting up to me a question, which I'm going to present to you. And that question kept going through my head all the time, and it said, how might God be using those outsiders, those enemies, those very people that we've been talking about? How might he use those people to teach us about faith? And I could be really wrong, but I have a feeling that every time we even get close to an answer, we are getting just that much closer to looking at the world through the eyes of God. Amen.